All right, church family, good morning. It's another Wednesday. Today is July the 8th, and I wanted to share a midweek encouragement with you. I wanted to start out, though, with an announcement. So I've been telling you for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe more, that we were going to have some church-wide forums about a few topics. So we've got 5 topics that we want to have church-wide conversations with. And so this is just an announcement to tell you that there is a plan, and I'm going to send out a video later in the week and probably an email to go along with it, telling you what the topics are, when we're going to talk about them, and how it is that we plan to talk about them. So be on the lookout for that. But it's going to be a short. It's 5 topics. We're going to do one every 2 weeks. So we're going to have an Ask the Elders segment about the topic. And then we're going to have the following week is going to be a Zoom format. But anyway, 5 topics, and it's all under the umbrella of Committed Christians, Current Events. That's going to be kind of the theme. Committed Christian current events. With the climate of the world that we live in, what do we as committed Christians do? How do we live? So look for some more instruction, some more communication about that coming later this week. Now, for your midweek encouragement, I wanted to have a follow-up to my message on Sunday. So I've had a few conversations with people since Sunday, which, by the way, I always enjoy. So if you have questions or concerns or something following a Sunday, we had built in that second serving before coronavirus, and that was one of the purposes. Was people have questions as soon as you wrap up talking about something. People have thoughts, people have questions, people have concerns, and so we've missed that in person. But I've had a few of those conversations this week, and they've all been very uplifting. They've all been very encouraging to me. But there were plenty of questions about the topic of risk, and a couple of common questions were, what does this look like for the individual, and what does this look like for, say, our church? And so I wanted to kind of address both of those real quick. But just to give you the thought process again, we've been talking about our identity as being in Jesus. Our identity is not in anything else about us other than that we are Christians, okay? And that's our primary identity. So when we place our life and our faith in Jesus, it changes our identity from whatever it was to now being a Christ follower. And that's who we are. We're Christ followers. Our lives have been changed. We put our faith in Him to lead us and guide us. So while faith gives us peace, the John 16:33 peace that we've been talking about for 3 months, it also, as we talked about Sunday, requires risk. When we don't know everything, and when we don't have all the answers, and when we aren't sure what things look like and how they're going to turn out, it's risky. And so a life of faith is, by definition, a life of risk. So we take faith-filled risk. That's what Sunday was all about. So what kind of risk do we take? What does this look like? So I sat down and I made just a short list. And sometimes I'm hesitant to even give examples because then people go, oh, okay, well, that's what it looks like. So these are just some examples. There's an infinite number of ways that God could be calling you to take a faith-filled risk. But these are some. And it's, everybody's at a different place. To some, a risk is going to be much smaller than what a risk will be for others. To some, a risk will be much bigger than what it is for others. But here's a few. Initiating a conversation with someone of a different identity. Someone who's not a Christian. Someone who's not a believer. Someone who's not white. Someone who doesn't have the same job I do. Is not working the same field. Someone who's, very, very different in every way from me in terms of my, what my background might be, what my family status might be, what my what sexual identity might be, skin color, any of that stuff that we've talked about. Initiating a conversation with somebody of a different identity. Faith-filled risk, right? Extending forgiveness or reconciliation towards someone. That's risky business, but that's the business of the gospel. performing a kind deed for someone. I mentioned us, taking food to our neighbor. Well, there's a certain level of risk involved in that kind of a thing. One we've been talking about for a year now is just speaking the truth about Jesus to someone, evangelizing, sharing the gospel, sharing the good news about Jesus. There's a lot of risk involved with that, but it's a faith-filled risk. It's looking to glorify God with our lives. Praying about and committing to volunteering somewhere, being a part of a ministry, blessing others. For some, a big risk, especially given our current climate, might be giving some of our money to a missionary, finding a missionary or giving it to the Great Commission Fund. That can be a faith-filled risk where we trust God with our resources and with what we have and give it to Him to further His kingdom, even when we don't exactly feel like we have anything, that we can afford to let go of. Taking faith-filled risk. Or even moving, changing career paths, these big adult kinds of changes. Faith-filled risk if we do it for the glory of God and for the gospel. Becoming a missionary. How about that? Instead of just giving, we feel God calling us to go, we go. We take a faith-filled risk. So those are just a few examples of what taking a faith-filled risk as someone whose identity is in Jesus looks like. And again, it could be a number of other things for you in your case. So I'm not sure what that looks like, but I know that God calls us as believers to take faith-filled risks. Living a life of faith is living a life of risk. We risk for the sake of the gospel. The only other thing I wanted to mention to you in this midweek video when it has to do with taking faith-filled risks is us as a church. One of the questions I mentioned earlier is, what does it look like for a church to take a faith-filled risk? Well, I don't know. For us, that's what we've been praying about. When we had those March conversations that got interrupted by the coronavirus, we were moving in that direction. With this talk of our identity being in Jesus and living a life of faith and risk, all these are still aiming toward what is God calling us to do? Why does God have our church here in this community for such a time as this, for as long as He's got us here? He's called us here to do something. Well, what is it? Well, I want to encourage you with a parable that Jesus told, one that you're familiar with. It's the parable of the talents, where the master gives talents to his servants. And there's this mantra that gets repeated every time the master has an interaction with the servant when he comes back. When the servant has been faithful and has invested his talent and has gained some talent. Well done, good and faithful servant. You remember these words? You were entrusted with a little, and now you'll be entrusted with a lot. And then, of course, the last servant is the one who buried it. He hid it because he was afraid. And words were not so kind, you wicked and you lazy servant. So whatever it is that God calls us to do, He's calling us to do now, before we get to that point, to be faithful with a little bit. Whatever it is that God's calling you to do it, right? Take the faith-filled risk. Trust Him. Down the road, He's got corporate faith-filled risks He's going to call us to do, right? And if we haven't been faithful in the small things, in things as small as having a conversation, risk level 1 or 0.5, having a conversation with someone that makes us uncomfortable, heaven's sakes, when we get to the point of talking about, taking a corporate risk together, man, that's going to feel like we're trying to go to Pluto or something, if we haven't been faithful with the few things that He's given us. So living a life of faith is living a life of risk. Sometimes the risk looks like having a conversation with someone. Sometimes the risk looks like moving to a foreign country, or a whole church saying, okay, God, we sense you calling us to this. We're going to go. We're going to trust you. We're going to do it. So what risk is God calling you to take right now, today? I don't know. Only you can answer that. But whatever it is, trust Him. Trust Him. Right? You've already trusted Him, presumably, with your life. Trust Him with your day. Trust Him with this situation whether it be having a conversation with someone, whether it be moving, changing career paths, whatever. God will take care of you. Be of good cheer. Again, I have overcome the world. So be a person of faith, be a person of risk today, so that tomorrow, when God calls you and calls us to do something bigger and more glorious that requires all of us, we're there. And it's not such a big step. So I love you, pray for you, and we'll continue to communicate through the week. Be looking for another video from me later this week with some explanations about how we're going to do these Committed Christian Current Event forums. So, all right, God bless you. See you next time.